Today, we're taking you deep into the sweltering heart of Texas, where summer nights are heavy, humid, and hiding terrifying truths behind old myths. From vanishing hitchhikers on lonely highways to ghostly whispers near dark lakes, get ready for 20 Texas summer encounters. The truth behind the myths. Each tale will leave you questioning what's real and what's lurking just out of sight beneath the relentless Texas sun. But first, a chilling warning. Many viewers make one crucial mistake: they watch these tales without subscribing, leaving themselves vulnerable to missing the most spine-tingling encounters yet to come. Don't make that mistake. Hit that subscribe button now, because here, the darkness is deeper, the nights are longer, and the horror is only beginning. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop your location down in the comments, because tonight, we're turning myths into nightmares. Now, let's dive into the darkness. It sat between mile marker 311 and 312, along a dry patch of State Highway 287 where the land flattens into forever. Nobody remembered when it was built. It wasn't on Google Maps. It wasn't in the Department of Transportation records either. But every now and then, a trucker would stop there, too tired to think, too wired to sleep. The sign just read, "Public Rest Area, Showers, Coffee, Diesel Assistance." Simple, plain. The kind of place that seems like salvation when your eyelids are lit and your radio's just started, whispering your mother's voice even though she's been dead for 4 years. That's how Tommy Stitch Hardin found it. He'd been hauling chemicals out of Corpus Christi, headed north for Colorado Springs when the road started stretching longer than it should. His dash clock said 3:13 a.m. The odometer kept ticking. But no towns, no lights, just desert. And then there it was, neon, blue, buzzing like an electric fly. He pulled in. There were no other rigs in the lot. No cars. Just one building with a flickering porch light and a vending machine humming like it was praying. Inside, it was clean. Too clean. Linoleum that shone like ice. Coffee already brewed. No cashier. No staff. Just a handwritten note taped to the Defy counter. Help yourself. Rest well. Leave nothing behind. Tommy didn't think much of it. He poured a cup, sat, closed his eyes for what felt like 3 minutes. When he woke, it was noon. His coffee was still warm. That should have been the first sign. The second was the message, scratched into his windshield from the inside. Don't come back. He thought it was a prank. Another trucker. Maybe kids. He wiped it off with a rag and drove on. But something had changed. The radio only picked up old station songs from the 1940s, weather reports in Spanish, from cities that didn't exist, and his rearview mirror always fogged, even when the AC was off. Even when the sun was shining, then the voices started. Not on the CB, in the rig itself, beneath the seat, inside the glove box. Like the engine had grown a mouth and started remembering things he hadn't told anyone. Things about the fire when he was 10. The girl he left behind in Amarillo. His dad's belt. He checked in with a doctor outside Wichita. Clean bill of health. Blood pressure a little high. Said he needed sleep. He didn't tell the doc about the writing that appeared in his notebook. Every morning phrases like, "You stayed too long and you left a piece of yourself here." He didn't tell him about the eyes he'd seen in the bathroom mirror at the rest area. Eyes that weren't his. Last week, Tommy tried to find the place again. Drove back down 287 slower this time. Watched for the sign. Drove 600 miles round trip. It wasn't there. But the back of his rig started, dripping something black, tar-like, thick, alive. He's parked now. Living in his truck behind a shuttered diner off Route 40. Won't go back on the road. Not anymore. Because last night, He found another note. It was under his pillow. You brought it with you. Marfa's flickering lights have been whispered about for generations, an eerie phenomenon, so persistent that even the hardiest desert folk won't speak its name after sunset. You see, out here in the West Texas desert, the landscape is ancient and unforgiving, a place where time feels stretched thin like the parched earth cracked beneath your boots. And beneath that expanse, something watches. Something older than the mesquite trees and the scorpion sting. The first time I heard about those lights was from Hank Collins, a weathered prospector with a face etched by sun and wind and a voice rough as gravel. Hank swore he was no superstitious fool, but the story he told me had a tremble in it, not of fear, but of a bone-deep respect. He said it happened one July night when the moon was swollen, a giant eye hanging low over the desert floor like it was weighing the land beneath it. The air was heavy with heat and silence, the kind that presses on your skin and makes every breath a labor. Hank was parked near an old dry riverbed, waiting for the heat to die down, when he noticed the light saw flickers in the distance, just beyond the edge of his headlights. Not the steady glow of a campfire, nor the sharp beam of a flashlight, but a wavering, pulsing dance of colors, reds, blues, greens that seemed to bend and shimmer in ways that defied the desert stillness. The lights weren't stationary. They moved like restless spirits tied to the dust and shadows. Curiosity got the better of Hank, as it always does with men who spend too much time alone in the wilderness. He grabbed his lantern and headed toward the flickering. As he got closer, the temperature dropped suddenly, the thick summer air replaced by a biting cold that seeped through his clothes. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, like the heartbeat of the earth itself quickening in warning. The lights flared brighter and shifted in shape, no longer simple points but elongated streaks that twisted like smoke caught in a breeze only they could feel. Then he heard it, a low, whispering chorus curling in the night wind. Not words as, "We know them," but sounds dripping with menace, pulling at the edges of his sanity. Hank said the voices promised pain and hunger, the promise of something ancient stirring awake after a long slumber. He spun around to leave but found himself rooted, frozen by an invisible force. The lights swarmed closer, surrounding him in a kaleidoscope of flickers that burned into his retinas. Shadows emerged within the lights, thin, elongated figures with eyes like coals, watching, waiting. His heart hammered, desperate to escape. A fate that felt written in the stars long before he was born. Hank finally broke free and ran, but the flickering lights chased him like a predator stalking wounded prey. The desert stretched endlessly, and no matter how fast he went, the lights were always just behind, never closing the gap, but never letting him feel safe either. I was skeptical when Hank first told me this. Stories like his are easy to dismiss when you're stuck in a town where reality is measured in cattle prices and weather forecasts. But that summer, I found myself drawn to the desert under that July moon. I wanted to see for myself, driving those dusty back roads, the heat clinging to the night like a second skin. I saw the lights too. At first, they were faint like the pulse of distant campfires. But they grew, flickering just beyond the horizon, their colors shimmering and folding over each other in impossible patterns. As I stopped the truck and stepped out, the silence swallowed me whole. The desert felt alive watching. The lights didn't flicker randomly. They moved with intent, gathering in spirals and waves, almost like they were performing some ancient ritual. And as I watched, the ground beneath me seemed to ripple like the surface of a blackened lake, warping reality itself. Suddenly the whispering began, soft and sinister, sliding into my mind like poison. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. Stay, join us, become part of the desert's hunger. I fled, driving as fast as my aging truck would allow, the lights flickering at the edge of my vision, trailing me with cruel persistence. When I finally reached Marfa and locked myself inside my motel room, the sensation of being watched didn't leave. It lingered, wrapping around my thoughts like a suffocating shroud. Since then, I've learned the locals don't just talk about the flickering lights, they respect them. Some say they're the souls of those lost in the desert, twisted by the unforgiving sun and darkness into something else. Others believe the lights are a warning, a manifestation of the desert's wrath, hungry for those who wander without purpose or protection. Every July, when the moon rises heavy and red, the flickering lights return. They call out to the curious, the lost, the foolish, promising answers, but delivering only despair. And if you find yourself caught beneath that moon, walking the desert's edge, you'd best look away. Because Marfa's flickering lights don't just glow, they hunger. And once you see them, they never truly let you go. The nights in San Antonio during the summer were different. The heat hung heavy, almost dripping from the air like thick honey, and the river, once a place of laughter and fishing, turned into a shadowy beast that swallowed light whole. It was the kind of heat that made the sweat drip down your back, that made your skin feel tight and raw, and that turned even the bravest souls into restless spirits come twilight. That's when the cries would start. The weeping of a woman whose sorrow didn't belong to this world, whose grief was older than the river itself, older than the city. They called her La Llorona, the weeping woman. But here in San Antonio, she wasn't just a story to scare children. She was a warning, a curse. The river had claimed children before, and it would claim more. Every year, when the sweltering nights rolled in, when the cicadas sang their unholy chorus and the sky stayed dark and thick like wet velvet, the disappearances would begin. It always started with the smallest ones, toddlers, young children, playing too close to the water's edge, their laughter echoing a little too loudly before the silence swallowed them whole. Then the cries would come, the awful, heart-wrenching sobs that pierced through the night. People said it was Elena, the mother who lost her children long ago, doomed to wander the riverbanks forever, searching and weeping for the kids she drowned. In a rage that only grief could fuel, Elena was a local, a woman they all knew once. She lived in a modest house not far from the river, the kind of house where the paint peeled and the porch sagged under the weight of years. She was beautiful once, with long black hair and eyes that sparkled like the stars above the water. But grief had hollowed her out. When her children vanished one by one, she lost her mind, or so the doctors said. The day she disappeared into the river herself, locals whispered that the river took her, dragged her under, but something darker happened. Something the river never let go. Years later, on the hottest night of July, Elena's cries could still be heard, slipping through the humidity like a cold knife. People who lived near the river swore the shadows weren't just shadows anymore. The trees seemed to lean in closer, the water rippled with unnatural currents, and the faint sound of wet footsteps splashing softly on the riverbank could be heard if you dared to listen. That's when the children began to vanish again. It started with little Maria Hernandez, a 7-year-old with wide brown eyes and a laugh that lit up the neighborhood. One evening, she was playing with her friends near the river, chasing fireflies, beneath the ancient oaks that guarded the water's edge. Her mother called her home for dinner, but Maria didn't answer. Her friends scattered, but Maria was gone, vanished without a trace except for a small puddle of water on the grass and a faint, sorrowful whisper that floated on the wind. Then came Jose Ramirez, a boy of 9 who loved fishing with his father by the river. One afternoon, he wandered too close to the edge and slipped silently into the murky water. His father found only a broken fishing rod and ripples where the boy had disappeared, but no body. The river gave nothing back. The townsfolk grew fearful. parents stopped letting their children play near the river. But some were reckless, others desperate, and a few dared to defy the warnings. Among them was Tommy Alvarez, a 16-year-old troublemaker who didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He mocked the stories of La Llorona, daring his friends to come with him on the hottest, darkest night of the year to the very river where the disappearances happened. They laughed, called it a joke, a childish legend, until the night Tommy vanished. The night was suffocating. The cicadas buzzed loudly, their song relentless and maddening. The moon was a faint silver sliver, barely lighting the path. Tommy rode his bike down the cracked pavement that led to the river, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. His friends waited behind, watching nervously from the street lamp's weak glow dot as Tommy neared the water's edge. Air shifted. The temperature dropped suddenly, a cold that cut through the sweat on his skin. Then the crying started, low at first, like a whisper lost in the wind, then swelling into a wail so full of pain and anger it made Tommy's blood run cold. He stopped, eyes wide, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The water rippled, unnaturally, as if something just beneath the surface was moving, waiting. Out of the darkness, she emerged at La Llorona, tall and draped in a dress soaked through with river water, her hair hanging in tangled, dripping strands. Her eyes were hollow, deep pits that burned with a furious grief, and her mouth opened in a silent scream that froze Tommy in place. Her hands reached out, long and twisted like the roots of the trees, pulling at him, dragging him closer to the water's edge. Tommy tried to pedal away, but his legs wouldn't move. The river called to him, and the night swallowed his screams. His bike was found the next morning, lying twisted in the reeds, but Tommy was gone, taken into the depths where no one could find him. After that, the river seemed to watch the town with a malevolent hunger. The cries grew louder, and the disappearances spread. Children, teenagers, even adults who wandered too close were pulled into the cold embrace of the water. The town whispered that Elena's spirit was no longer just mourning, she was hunting. Desperate to fill the void. Left by her lost children, she dragged others down, claiming them one by one, drowning their laughter beneath the surface. The elders warned of the curse, of the price paid by those who ignore the river's sorrow. They said La Llorona was born of grief and rage, trapped between worlds, condemned to wander the shadows forever. And every night, on those sweltering San Antonio evenings, her cries echoed down the riverbanks, a haunting reminder that some legends are born from the darkest truths, and some ghosts never rest. If you ever find yourself near the San Antonio River on a hot summer night, listen closely. Don't be fooled by the heavy stillness. Beneath the water's calm surface, something waits, and if you hear the weeping woman call your name, run. Because once she's chosen you, the river will never let you go. The humidity clung to everything like a second skin, thick and suffocating. It was the kind of summer night that seemed to press down on the world, making the air heavy and still, the insects silent as if even they feared what lurked in the dark. The kind of night where shadows stretched long and twisted between the gnarled trees lining the creek. The old Goatman's Bridge sat there, rotten and forgotten, its planks splintered, its railings hanging loose like broken bones. Locals whispered of it but stayed away, especially after dark. But to a group of teenagers that night, it was an invitation, a dare. Tyler was the leader, or at least he thought he was. His easy grin and loud voice made him the center of attention. But underneath, he was just as scared as the rest. Around him stood Maggie, sharp and skeptical. Jamie, the quiet one who kept his eyes darting nervously. Megan, with her phone's flashlight bouncing wild beams against the trees. And a few others, all gathered under the full moon that cast a silver glow over the water dot they had heard the stories, of course. How decades ago, a man with the head of a goat had been seen wandering these woods, guarding the bridge like some ancient sentinel. The legend said he was a cursed creature, part man, part demon, a goatman who punished those who mocked or disturbed his domain. The stories were old, passed down like warnings in hushed voices. No one took them seriously anymore, not these kids. Tyler shoved his hands in his pockets and laughed. "All right, everyone. Who's brave enough to cross the bridge and yell his name? Goatman, come out and prove you're real." Maggie rolled her eyes but stepped forward, her voice cutting through the thick night. "Goatman, we ain't scared of you. Show yourself if you've got the guts." The others joined in, their voices rising into a chorus of teasing and taunts. They stomped on the wooden planks, echoing through the trees, their laughter sharp and brittle against the quiet. The bridge groaned in protest beneath them, but no sign of the goatman came. Minutes passed. The night seemed to settle back into silence. Then a faint sound echoed from below, the soft slap of hooves against mud. "Did you hear that?" Jamie whispered, eyes wide. They all froze. The noise came again, closer this time. Slow, deliberate. Hoofbeats. Not from any horse or deer, but something heavier, unnatural. A cold wind stirred, and with it a faint, sulphurous scent. The smell of wet earth, rot, and something metallic. The flashlight beams jittered, flickering, as if fighting an unseen force. Then they saw it, hoof prints, massive and deep, pressed freshly into the mud by the creek's edge. Wet and glistening under the moonlight, Tyler's bravado cracked. "It's just some animal," he said, though his voice betrayed him, but the prints led toward the thick woods, disappearing beneath the shadows of ancient oaks and maples. A low growl rumbled through the trees, vibrating in their chests like a warning. Megan fumbled with her phone, hands shaking as she tried to call for help. No signal. Then, from the darkness emerged a figure. It moved with terrible grace, muscles rippling beneath matted fur and skin that seemed half human, half goat. Its legs bent backward, ending in sharp hooves. Its face was a nightmare long. Twisted horns curling from its skull, eyes burning an icy blue, glowing with an unnatural light that froze the blood. The goatman! Fear rooted them in place. Maggie screamed, but no sound came from her throat. Tyler tried to run, but his legs felt like lead. The creature stepped forward, each hoofbeat echoing like a death knell. One by one, the teenagers scattered, crashing through the underbrush, branches slapping their faces and arms. Behind them, the goatman's snarls grew louder, faster, hunting them like prey. Jamie tripped and fell. The goatman was on him in seconds, its heavy hand grabbing at his ankle, dragging him screaming into the shadows. No one looked back. Maggie made it to the edge of the woods, panting, her heart hammering in her chest. She dared a glance behind. The goatman stood at the tree line, eyes fixed on the others, snarling in frustration. "Run!" she cried, but the others were gone, swallowed by the night. The next morning, the townsfolk found Maggie at the edge of the forest, shaking and incoherent. The others were never seen again. Over the years, the story grew darker. Those who mocked the legend or dared to cross the Goatman's Bridge at night often disappeared. The only clues left were deep hoof prints in the mud, sometimes smeared with something dark and sticky, and the bridge itself, always creaking, groaning as if alive, warning travelers to stay away. Some say the Goatman is not just a creature, but a curse, that he hunts anyone who breaks the silence of his domain, that on humid nights like this, you can still hear his hoofbeats echoing through the trees. A chilling reminder that some legends are better left alone. And if you ever find yourself near that bridge, dare to listen. You might just hear the low growl of the Goatman coming for you. The summer nights in Abilene stretched long and heavy, thick with heat and the lazy buzz of cicadas that never seemed to sleep. The kind of nights when the moon hung low and swollen, casting a sickly pale light over the cracked sidewalks and empty streets. Folks in town had learned to lock their doors tight and keep their curtains drawn, especially after midnight, when the black-eyed kids came knocking. It wasn't something spoken about openly. Parents hushed their children, elders shook their heads with a quiet dread, and teenagers dared each other to run down dark alleys just to see if the stories were true. But the truth, as always, was worse than the stories. It began one late July night at the edge of town, where the streetlights flickered and the air smelled faintly of dying grass and smoke from a neighbor's backyard grill. Helen Crawford, widow living alone in the old Campbell house, was used to silence, save for the occasional creak from the wooden floors. She'd lived there for 20 years, long enough to know every sound, every shadow. Just past midnight, a soft knock came. At her front door, 3 taps, slow, steady, deliberate. Not like a stranger pounding or a drunk yelling for help. This was gentle, almost polite, like a child's cautious inquiry. Helen's breath caught. She didn't answer, not at first. She sat frozen in her rocking chair, staring at the window, her heart hammering so loud she thought it might wake the dead. The knock came again, softer this time, followed by a quiet voice that sounded too sweet, too innocent. "Ma'am, can we come in?" "Please?" Helen's eyes flicked to the door, where 2 figures stood silhouetted by the streetlight. They looked like children, no more than 10 or 11 years old. Pale, almost translucent skin, clothes that hung loose and dirty. But the eyes are God. Those eyes were impossible to ignore. They were pure black, deep pits of darkness with no whites, no iris, just endless voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. Helen shook her head, backing away. "No, I'm sorry, kids. It's late. You need to go home." The boy took a step closer, his voice a soft whisper that crawled under her skin. "Please, we're lost." Helen slammed the door and locked it, fumbling for her phone to call the police. But when she glanced out the window, the kids were gone, vanished into the night like shadows swallowed by the darkness. That night, Helen didn't sleep. Every creak, every whisper of wind set her nerves on edge. Outside, the neighborhood was silent, but inside her mind, she could still hear the knock, the pleading voices, the black, empty eyes. The next morning, the town was buzzing with panic. Sarah Lawson, a 12-year-old girl from 2 blocks down, had vanished from her bedroom window, last seen just before midnight. No signs of forced entry, no clues left behind, just a faint smell like cold ash lingering near her window. Whispered about the black-eyed kids, and old-timers nodded grimly, saying the stories were real, that the darkness was hungry, and those who answered the knock were lost forever. Over the next few weeks, more knockings were reported, always after midnight, always during the hottest summer nights. Some said the kids didn't speak, only stared with those endless black eyes, their innocent faces twisted into faint smiles that didn't reach their voids. Others heard the whispers, soft, coaxing, promising safety, comfort, escape. A few brave souls answered the door. None came back. Tom Henderson, a truck driver known for his grit and stubbornness, was one of them. He heard the knock at 12:15 a.m., tired from a long haul, and figured it was some kids needing water or a place to call their parents. When he opened the door, he saw 2 children standing there, the girl with pale skin and ragged clothes, the boy just behind her, clutching a broken toy. Their eyes were too black, too empty. "Can we come in?" The girl's voice was calm, patient, but beneath it lurked something ancient and terrible. Tom said no, firmly. But the boy whispered something that made his blood run cold. "Once inside, you never leave." Tom slammed the door and called the sheriff, but the kids were gone. He didn't sleep that night either, but when dawn came, he found scratches on his front door, deep angry marks that hadn't been there before. Days later, Tom disappeared. His truck was found abandoned on the highway, engine running, lights on, but no sign of Tom. The only clue was the shattered windshield, cracked from the inside, and a faint whisper heard on the CB radio. "Let us in." Fear gripped Abilene like a vice. Families boarded windows, installed cameras, and prayed for protection. But the black-eyed kids moved with the shadows. They slipped through the darkness like smoke, knocking on doors, waiting for the curious or the compassionate. Those who opened the door were pulled into a darkness deeper than night, vanished without a trace. No footprints, no struggle, no sign of what happened to them. Just silence and the echo of the knock again and again. In the heavy summer nights, the old-timers say the black-eyed kids aren't human. There's something else, lost souls, demons, or shadows born from the town's forgotten sins. Some say they're hungry, needing to feed on fear and innocence. Whatever they are, they wait. They knock, and if you answer, you disappear. One summer, when the heat was unbearable, I heard the knock myself. 3 slow taps on my door just past midnight. I swear, when I looked through the peephole, I saw those eyes staring back, blacker than the void, endless and cold. I didn't open. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the windows and the cicadas hum louder than usual, I still hear that soft voice whispering through the night, "Can we come in?" And I wonder how long I'll last before the knock comes again. The Phantom Hounds of Devil's Backbone. The Devil's Backbone wasn't just a stretch of road, it was a place where the world seemed to thin, where shadows gathered like a living thing and the night whispered secrets better left unheard. Locals around the small Texas town of Jasper spoke of it in low tones, clutching their whiskey tight and glancing over their shoulders. They called it cursed, haunted, and most of all, hunted, because the backbone was home to the Phantom Hounds. These weren't your everyday dogs, the kind you could see bounding through a field or hear barking at a stranger. No, these were beasts born from darkness, more legend than flesh. They prowled the ridge on hot summer nights when the heat made the air shimmer and the cicadas buzzed like a swarm of angry bees. When the moon was low, just a faint sliver, their howls began sharp, eerie cries that pierced through the humid air and froze the blood in the veins of any traveler unlucky enough to hear them. The story begins with Henry Dawson, a trucker who'd been hauling goods across Texas for over 20 years. Henry wasn't superstitious. He laughed off the tailies of ghost dogs and cursed roads. But one July night, after a long haul from Houston, he found himself caught on the backbone just as the sun dipped below the horizon. His rig creaked and groaned under the heavy load, the tires crunching gravel as he rounded the first steep bend. The heat pressed in on him like a suffocating blanket, and sweat dripped down his face. As darkness swallowed the sky, Henry's headlights cut through thick fog that had rolled in mysteriously fast, wrapping the road in a ghostly mist. That's when he heard it, a low growl, distant but unmistakable. His eyes darted to the roadside, where the trees seemed to sway with no wind. Then came the howl, a bone-chilling wail that seemed to stretch across the miles and shake the very earth beneath his wheels. Suddenly, from the edges of the fog, shapes emerged. At first, Henry thought they were wolves, but these creatures were too large, too fast. Their eyes gleamed red and gold, reflecting his truck's headlights like twin fires in the night. Their fur was patchy, ragged, with patches of shadow seeming to writhe inside their bodies as if they were not fully there. Their mouths were open wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, each one sharp enough to shred steel. Henry slammed the accelerator, trying to outrun them, but the road twisted dangerously. The phantom hounds matched his speed, running alongside his rig as if tethered by some invisible leash. Their snarls grew louder, blending into a chorus of savage hunger. The truck shuddered violently. The hound's teeth didn't just bite. The air, they bit at the very soul of the machine, rattling the frame as if trying to tear it apart. Then, the strangest thing happened. Invisible claws scraped across the back of Henry's neck. He felt a cold, sharp pain that cut through sweat and fear, but when he reached back to brush it away, his fingers met only flesh. No blood, no mark, nothing, yet the pain lingered like a ghost's bite. Suddenly, the hounds vanished, melting back into the fog like smoke scattered by the wind. Henry's breath came in ragged gasps as the radio crackled to life with static, then silence. He pulled the truck off the road, hands trembling as he stared at his reflection in the cracked side mirror. That night, he swore he heard faint, distant howls echoing in the stillness behind him. Days later, Henry found deep, claw-like scars etched across his neck-long, thin scratches that stung without bleeding, as if invisible jaws had closed tight and marked him. Over time, more travelers came forward with similar stories. The howls that haunted their dreams, the glowing eyes glimpsed in the forest, and the bite marks that left invisible wounds. The hounds hunted not for flesh but for something else, souls. Memories, sanity. Those who escaped the backbone's fury often suffered nightmares of teeth and blood, waking in cold sweats with the taste of iron in their mouths. Some never spoke of it, terrified the hounds would find them again. Local legend says the phantom hounds were once hunting dogs of a cruel man who lived centuries ago on the ridge. He was a hunter of men, a slaver who used his beast to track down escapees. When the townsfolk finally caught him, justice came in the form of fire, but the dogs were never found. Instead, their spirits cursed the land, condemned to roam the backbone forever, hunting travelers who dared disturb their restless domain. On hot summer nights, when the air grows thick and the moon hides behind the clouds, the backbone howls. And if you listen close, you can hear the snap of jaws, the pounding of claws on gravel, and the voices of the damned whispering from the tree's dot. So if you ever find yourself driving through the devil's backbone under a summer sky, remember Henry's warning: don't stop, don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't look back, because the phantom hounds are always just behind you, hungry for more than just flesh. Galveston was a place where the ocean never quite let go. It was a town built on sand and memory, where the salty air carried whispers of things long past, and the horizon always held the threat of a storm. Every summer, as the heat thickened, and the humidity clung like a second skin, the island held its breath because it knew the hurricanes were coming. But before the sky broke open and the winds began their savage song, something else arrived first. Something that nobody talked about much outside the corners of old bars or whispered in the shadows of front porches. They called them the storm specters. Figures that appeared in the days before a hurricane, ghostly shapes drifting in and out of the fog that rolled in from the Gulf. Some said they were warnings. Some said they were omens, but no one who'd seen them ever lived to doubt there. Power. Sarah Hammond was born and raised in Galveston, a girl of the sea and sand. She knew the signs of a storm better than anyone. The way the birds fell silent, the sharp tang of ozone in the air, the restless tossing of the palms. But that summer, things were different. The weather was too still, too perfect, like the calm before a scream. And that's when she saw them for the first time. She was walking her dog, a scrappy mutt named Riptide, along the seawall just as the afternoon sun was swallowed by heavy clouds. The horizon was a thick line of gray, and the breeze smelled like old secrets and brine. Out there, where the water met the sky, the air shimmered with heat, and then suddenly shapes emerged. Figures tall, pale and shimmering like smoke caught. In the dying light dot at first, she thought it was a trick of the light or heat waves dancing off the waves. But as she stared, the figures took on form. Faces worn and weathered, eyes empty but full of something terrible. Their bodies flickered in and out of sight, sometimes clear as glass, sometimes just mist. They stood there at the edge of the water, motionless yet somehow watching her. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She felt a cold grip close around her ribs despite the stifling heat. The figures didn't speak. They didn't move toward her, but they didn't retreat either. It was as if they were waiting for something she couldn't understand. She tried to call Riptide back, but the dog was frozen, staring at the ghosts with a low growl in his throat. One of the specters raised a hand, pale and thin, fingers like seaweed tangled in moonlight. The wind whispered a voice only Sarah could hear, soft and urgent. Come. The words slipped into her mind like an undertow, pulling her closer to the water's edge. She struggled against the invisible force, but the figure's silent call was relentless, tugging at something deep inside her, something ancient and hungry. The sea behind them churned, dark and cold beneath the brewing storm. Underneath the keel, pale skin of the specter's hand, Sarah thought she saw something move, a shadow swimming just beneath the surface, something waiting in the depths to drag her under. Fear burned through her, but the pull didn't stop. The storm hit Galveston hard that night. Winds screamed like banshees, ripping trees from the earth and shattering windows with icy rain. Streets vanished beneath the water, homes floated like driftwood, and the island was swallowed by chaos. But in the eye of the storm, in the darkest hours when the world seemed ready to end, the storm specters walked among the survivors. Some say they appeared to guide the lucky away from the worst of it, warning them to leave before it was too late. Others say they came for the lost and the broken, whispering promises of peace beneath the waves. Those who followed the specters were never seen again, pulled into the sea's cold embrace, swallowed whole by the hurricane's fury. In the days after the storm, the people of Galveston found strange things washed ashore, bones tangled in seaweed, fragments of clothing that belonged to those who had vanished, and sometimes footprints leading from the water into the empty streets, only to disappear into thin air. Old-timers whispered about the curse of the island, about how the storm specters were not just warnings but hunters, waiting for their chance every summer. Sarah never forgot that summer. She never forgot the way those figures called to her, or the cold that settled inside her chest when she looked into their empty eyes. And every year since, as the clouds gather and the winds begin to howl, she watches the Gulf, wondering who will see the specters next and who will answer their silent call. Because in Galveston, the hurricanes aren't the only things that come with the storm. The specters are always there, waiting, figures from the depths that promise safety but deliver only darkness, pulling the living into the watery grave that the island has known for centuries. And some nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear their whispers riding the wind, calling out to the next soul who dares to stand too close to the sea. The granite dome of Enchanted Rock had always been a place of mystery, even before it became a park crowded with hikers and weekend campers. The locals told stories about the rock's restless spirit, but most brushed it off as legend. Still, every summer solstice, something stirred that no one could explain. The sun would hang longest in the sky, shadows would stretch farther than they should, and then, as darkness swallowed the day, a campfire would ignite somewhere on the rocks. Vast, smooth surface without anyone kindling it. This fire was no ordinary blaze. It burned with a strange blue-orange flame that seemed almost alive, flickering with unnatural intensity. The smoke didn't drift lazily skyward like normal smoke. It curled in tight spirals, thick and heavy, blotting out the stars. Around the Fire, the air would hum, vibrating with a low, almost musical frequency like a song you could feel more than hear. The first time they noticed it, no one wanted to believe what was happening. A group of friends had been hiking that day, joking and joking under the scorching sun. They planned to watch the sunset from the summit, maybe snap some photos to brag about. As the sky bled into twilight, one of them heard laughter, soft, distant, and childlike, carried by the wind. It was the kind of laughter that crawled into your bones, both inviting and terrifying. Drawn by the sound, they climbed toward it, weaving through the scrub and granite ledges until they saw the fire. It was perfect, a ring of smooth stones encasing, logs crackling with eerie light. The flames reached high, casting dancing shadows that twisted and warped like living things. It was mesmerizing, hypnotic. The laughter grew louder, now all around them, and it wasn't just children's voices. There were other sounds mixed in, whispers, chants, sighs from the past. No one lit that fire. No one could explain it, but it beckoned like a siren's call, and one by one the hikers stepped closer, pulled by some invisible thread. They sat on the rocks, warmed by the heat, and began to share stories, tales of loved ones, regrets, forgotten dreams. The fire seemed to respond, glowing brighter, reacting to their words. But as the night deepened, things changed. The laughter shifted. It became harsher, more manic. Shadows seemed to stretch and reach out, creeping along the rock like living fingers. The wind carried voices whispering secrets no one was meant to hear. Hikers started to feel it, a heavy presence pressing in on their minds. A gnawing unease, like they were being watched by something older than time itself. One man, a skeptic named Carl, tried to break the spell. He stood, laughed at the fire, called it a trick of the light, a hallucination caused by heat and exhaustion. But the flame suddenly flared higher, roiling like a living beast. The laughter stopped, replaced by a low growl that vibrated through the ground. Then, the fire spat out a sudden burst of sparks, and Carl vanished. No one saw him leave. One moment, he was standing there. The next, nothing but a curl of smoke where he had stood. The others froze, panic rising in their chests, but the fire's hypnotic pull held them fast. The next morning, search parties combed Enchanted Rock, calling out names into the thin desert air. They found scattered belongings, backpacks slumped over cold granite, a single boot abandoned on a ledge, but no sign of the hikers themselves. It was as if they had been erased, pulled into the rock's timeless embrace. Years passed and the legend grew. Each solstice, new people disappeared, each drawn to the phantom campfire that burned without wood or match. Park rangers tried to warn visitors, putting up signs, telling stories to scare people away from the summit on those nights. But curiosity was a hard thing to resist. The locals knew better. They said the fire was the rock's heart beating through the centuries, an ancient entity that fed on souls. It was a gate between worlds, and the laughter was the siren song of those lost echoes of those trapped forever in the fire's glow, prisoners of a place where time twisted and frayed. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind shifted just right, you could hear the laughter carried down the trail, soft, haunting, impossible to ignore. And if you're foolish enough to follow it, you might find yourself sitting by that endless fire, sharing stories with shadows until the flames take. You too, because the campfire at Enchanted Rock never lets go. Jacob's Well was one of those places you couldn't help but notice, even if you tried to ignore it. Tucked away in the dense woods of the Texas Hill Country, just off a forgotten dirt road where the map stopped caring, it looked like an ordinary spring-fed pool at first glance. The water was crystal clear, cold as a coffin and smooth as glass, reflecting the sky and the trees so perfectly that on some days you'd swear you were looking at a portal to another world. The locals called it a natural wonder, a gift from the land, but everyone also knew the stories. The whispered warnings that trailed after you, like the smell of damp earth and decay. Nobody ever talked about it openly, not in polite company, but the stories were as old as the cypress trees that leaned over the water's edge. They said Jacob's Well had no bottom, that it was a gateway to the underworld, a dark, endless abyss where the lost went to drown forever. Old men with cracked lips and cloudy eyes told tales of boys and girls who'd vanished after diving too deep, swallowed by the well's hungry darkness. Some said those lost swimmers were still down there, trapped in a limbo between worlds, their bodies twisted and broken but their minds forever awake, listening, waiting. In the small town of Wimberley, the well was a rite of passage, a dare to the brave and reckless. Every summer, teenagers and wanderers from nearby cities showed up with swim trunks and cheap confidence, drawn by the legends and the thrill. The well's reputation was magnetic, a siren's call wrapped in cold water and mystery. They would jump in, slap the surface, laugh and shout. Some didn't even bother to swim, content to float lazily on their backs beneath the sun. But the ones who dared to dive deeper, those were the ones who never came back the same. Or at all. One summer, a group of friends from Austin arrived at Jacob's Well, their skin glistening with sunscreen and their spirits buoyant with youth. There was Mark, the leader, always looking for a way to impress. Lisa, sharp and cautious but swept up by the group's bravado. Danny, the joker, and Sarah, who hated the water but hated being left behind more. They laughed and joked, diving off the jagged limestone ledge, chasing each other in circles. The water was intoxicatingly cold, almost painful on the skin, but none of them wanted to leave. As the sun sank lower, Mark dared the others to dive deeper, to prove their courage. "They say this place goes down forever," he said, voice echoing eerily over the water. "Who's got the guts to see what's at the bottom?" Danny was the first to accept. He dove in like a stone, kicking hard, chasing the deepening blue. But when he didn't resurface within the expected time, the laughter faded, replaced by a growing unease. Lisa and Sarah dove after him, but the water closed over their heads like a tomb. When they finally surfaced, gasping and coughing, Danny was gone. That night, as they sat around a campfire near the well, the air heavy with fear, strange sounds began to emerge from the darkness. It wasn't the usual night noises, no frogs, or crickets or rustling leaves, but soft, whispering voices, almost like breath against skin. The friends tried to ignore it, but the voices seemed to grow louder, more insistent, calling their names with a tone that was both pleading and commanding. Sarah, unable to resist, slipped away from the firelight, drawn toward the water's edge. The whispers pulled at her mind like a lover's touch, gentle but impossible to fight. She leaned over the well, staring into the black mirror below, and saw shapes, moving figures submerged in the gloom, eyes glinting with something ancient. And hungry. The next morning, Sarah was found wandering the woods, soaked and shivering, eyes vacant and mouth moving silently as if repeating the whispers. The town declared the well cursed, but the summer continued. Others arrived, drawn by the legend, some to test fate, others simply unaware. And each summer, the same pattern repeated. Someone dived too deep, someone else answered the whispers, and the well claimed another soul. They say that if you stand at the edge of Jacob's Well just as the sun disappears behind the hills, you can hear the whispers, faint and hypnotic. They're the voices of the lost swimmers, those who heard the call from beneath the surface and couldn't resist. They promise peace, freedom, and escape from the world above, but it's a lie. Once you hear them, once you start to listen, the well never lets you go. The water is a dark mouth, waiting, patient, and eternal. And if you dive too deep, the whispers will pull you down into their cold embrace. Into the dark where no light reaches, where you become just another lost swimmer, forever swimming in circles beneath Jacob's well, a prisoner of the voices beneath the water. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the night is still and the air is heavy, you might see a flicker beneath the surface, a pale hand reaching out, a glimpse of a face twisted in silent terror. The lost swimmers are there, beneath the well, waiting for the next to join them in the endless dark. The summer of '98 in Lubbock was one for the books, not for the usual reasons, like dust storms or scorching days, but because of the calls. It started in late July when the heat wave settled over West Texas like a suffocating blanket. The sun beat down so hard the pavement cracked and peeled like old paint, and even the cottonwoods seemed to droop under the weight of the sky. Nights offered no relief. The city's windows rattled with heat waves, and the only sound was the hum of countless air conditioners fighting a losing battle. Then the phones began to ring. At first, it was a trickle, an odd, misplaced ring at odd hours, but nobody paid much attention. Old Mrs. Harper, who lived on the east side near the cotton fields, thought it was her grandson playing a prank. But when she picked up, there was only silence, thick and absolute, filling the line. After a long, tense pause, a faint whisper slipped through a name. Her granddaughter's name. Only, the granddaughter had died in a car accident over 20 years ago. Mrs. Harper's hands trembled as the line went dead. Word spread quickly, as it always does in a town the size of Lubbock. Phone calls plagued nearly every block, every home. The pattern was the same. The phone would ring, you'd pick it up, and then nothing. No voice, no static, just a cold, empty silence that seemed to seep into your very bones. And just as you thought it was safe to hang up, a name would be whispered soft, breathy, and chilling. Sometimes the names were familiar, sometimes not. Sometimes it was your name, and sometimes the name of someone long dead or missing, someone nobody could explain. The calls always ended with that whispered name, and then the line would go dead, as if the caller vanished into the night itself. Folks in Lubbock stopped answering their phones. Businesses left answering machines on 24/7s, but the callers never left a message. No one ever heard a voice on the other end, just that eerie silence and a name carried on the wind. The sheriff, a weathered man named Tom Granger, tried to calm the town. "Heat makes people hear things," he said, "makes them jumpy. It's nothing but the mind playing tricks." But even Sheriff Granger confessed to losing sleep, and there was a time when his own phone rang at 3:17 a.m. He answered once, and the silence on the other end chilled him enough that he never picked up again. Stories piled up, one on top of the other, like layers of dust on a forgotten shelf. The Benson family heard their missing son's name, even though he had returned safely from college just a week earlier. The Wilsons reported a voice whispering their neighbor's name, a man who vanished without a trace years before, leaving behind only rumors and cold shoulders. Children swore the calls were for their invisible friends, or worse, the things hiding beneath their beds. One man, Jimmy Malone, was different. Jimmy was a trucker, rough and hard as the Texas highways he rode. Nothing in his 40 years on the road shook him, no ghost story or superstition. But even Jimmy wasn't immune. One night, after weeks of the calls, his phone rang. The silence on the other end stretched out, cold and thick. Then, in the darkness, a whisper broke through, his own name. Jimmy was startled but played it cool. He answered, "Who's there?" No response, only the static of silence. Then, from behind, a cold, rasping breath caressed his neck like ice. Jimmy spun around, flashlight in hand, but the trailer was empty. He never slept that night. The next morning, Jimmy was gone. No note, no signs of struggle. Just an empty trailer, his phone still on the hook. Ringing silently in the still heat. After Jimmy's disappearance, the calls stopped as suddenly as they'd started. The heat wave broke and a cool wind swept over Lubbock. The city breathed. A collective sigh of relief, but the memory of the night callers lingered like a scar. Some say the calls were warnings. Others say they were invitations, whispers from something that lives just beyond the edge of sound, something that moves in silence and shadows, calling the names of those it wants to take. Tonight, in the still heat of a Lubbock summer, if you listen closely, you might hear your phone ring. If you answer, there's only silence. But wait just long enough, and a whisper may slip through, calling your name, soft, cold, and full of promise. And if you hang up too soon, well, some say that's the last thing you'll ever do. Sulphur Springs was a place wrapped in a fragile kind of magic, one that called out to restless souls every summer, promising freedom and adventure in equal measure. It was a forgotten stretch of wilderness in the heart of East Texas, where the trees leaned thick and green over winding streams, and the air was soaked with the scent of wet earth and pine resin. Families came for the fishing and the cool spring water, teenagers for the campfires and freedom, and the old-timers for memories best left unspoken. But the deeper you went into those woods, past the cracked gravel roads and the last flicker of cell signals, the more you felt something pressing in from the shadows. It was a presence so subtle you could mistake it for the night's natural stillness until it wasn't. They called it the shadow. It wasn't something you saw with your eyes. It was something you felt crawling beneath your skin, a blackness that slithered in the corners of your vision and lingered behind every tree. It was a void, a dark ripple in the fabric of the night, an absence that seemed to suck the warmth from the air and the hope from your heart. The locals never spoke about it directly. Stories were passed in hushed tones by the fire, warnings disguised as legends. An old man named Virgil once said, "It don't kill you quick. It takes what's inside, the fear you don't want to show, and it feeds on that. Leaves you empty, lost." His eyes would darken at the memory, and the younger folks would nod uneasily, trying to laugh it off. But no one who spent a long summer in those woods ever really laughed after dark. Jamie Rourke was 17, a city kid with a mouth full of sarcasm and a daredevil streak. He came with a group of friends every summer, chasing the thrill that only the wilderness could offer. They pitched tents near the springs, built bonfires, and dared each other to wander alone after sunset. Jamie didn't believe in the shadow. He called it campfire nonsense. On the third night, the air was thick and heavy. The summer heat pressed down like a weight, and even the usual chorus of cicadas was muted. Jamie decided to slip away from the group, drawn by a strange pull he couldn't explain, a whisper at the edge of his senses. He wandered deeper into the woods, past the old stone bridge where moss crept like veins, past the twisted roots that looked like the hands of something trying to claw free from the earth. The sun sank low, and shadows stretched long, bleeding into one another until there was nothing but darkness. Jamie's footsteps slowed. The trees seemed to lean closer, branches entwining like fingers reaching for him. Then the firelight behind him flickered and vanished. The others must have gone back to camp. That's when the shadow found him. It didn't come at him with claws or teeth. It didn't roar or snarl. Instead, it flowed like smoke, a darker dark that swallowed the weak moonlight and whispered with a voice that wasn't a voice. It seeped into Jamie's mind, twisting his thoughts, dredging up every buried fear, the time he got lost in the city, the panic he hid from his friends, the loneliness he never admitted. Jamie's heart pounded, a wild drum in his chest. The shadow folded around him like a shroud, cool and heavy. It was as if the forest itself had turned against him, the trees holding their breath, the wind silenced. He tried to scream but found his voice lost in the void. The creature fed on his fear, savoring each spike of terror until Jamie's legs gave way and his eyes rolled back. Then, without a sound, he vanished into the night, when the others went. Looking the next morning, all they found was his tent collapsed and soaked with dew. No footprints led away, no sign of a struggle. Just silence and the faintest chill hanging in the air. Word spread through the town, but no one dared to say it aloud. Jamie was gone to the shadow, taken by the thing that fed on fear itself. Over the years, the pattern repeated. Campers vanished without trace. Sometimes, a scream echoed faintly through the woods, so faint you doubt you heard it. Sometimes, a figure flickered just beyond the firelight, darker than night, moving like liquid shadow. One summer, Sarah, a girl with a quiet strength, stayed behind after her friends fled in terror. She didn't want to believe the stories, but she knew something was wrong when the shadows deepened too fast and the woods grew deathly still. Alone by the spring, Sarah felt the eyes. The shadow watched, hungry and patient. She lit a fire, shaking as the darkness crept closer, pulling it. Her thoughts, dredging up every fear she buried deep inside. But instead of hiding, she faced it. She whispered her fears aloud, naming them one by one, her loneliness, her doubts, the cold claw of anxiety that gripped her heart, the shadow. Hesitated. It recoiled from the light of honesty and courage. Sarah stayed awake until dawn, fighting the darkness with the only weapon it feared, the light of truth. When the sun rose, the woods sighed and the shadows retreated. The shadow was still there, waiting, but it had been held at bay. Sulphur Springs still calls every summer. But now the stories are different. Some say you can't run from the shadow. Others whisper that facing it, naming your fear, can save you. But no one forgets that deep in those ancient woods, a creature waits, a living darkness that feeds not on flesh, but on fear itself. And every summer it grows hungrier. The summer of 1982 was the last year the carnival rolled through Waco. It wasn't like the usual traveling shows that parked on the edge of town for a week, selling funnel cakes and promising a night of fun and games. This carnival was different. Old, strange, and somehow permanent, like it had always been there just out of sight. The locals whispered about the faded signs and the peeling posters that appeared on telephone poles overnight, the ones with a crooked clown's grin and the words Carnival of Wonders, Midsummer's Eve. But nobody remembered who put them up, and nobody ever asked. Then one night, a fire swept through the grounds, burning the wooden rides and tents to ash. The carnival vanished after that, leaving behind only charred rubble and an eerie silence. The town tried to forget, but on midsummer nights, long after the embers cooled and the smoke faded, something woke up in that empty lot beside the river. The first time I saw it, I was 16, and it was one of those unbearably hot July nights, when even the air didn't move. I was walking home from my friend's place, and as I passed the edge of town, the street lights flickered. That's when I heard it, a faint music drifting over the cracked asphalt, like a distant call. The smell hit me next, sharp and sickly. Sweet, like burnt sugar and something metallic. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked toward the old lot, and there, shimmering in the heat, were the lights, dozens of tiny bulbs glowing like fireflies trapped in a jar. The carnival had come back. At first, I thought it was a trick of the heat, the way the asphalt rippled in the darkness. But as I watched, a Ferris wheel slowly turned into view, its rusted metal shining under the moonlight. The carriages swayed, though there was no wind. Beyond it, I saw the funhouse, its mirrors glinting like cold eyes, and the carousel, horses. Frozen mid-gallop, their glass eyes staring into nothing. I wasn't alone. A few other townsfolk had gathered at the edge, drawn like moths. Old Mrs. Callahan, who'd lived in Waco since before the carnival's first arrival, told us it was a curse that the carnival was alive and hungry. She said the rides were built from lost souls, that once you stepped inside, you were theirs forever. She warned us to stay away, but the temptation was too strong. The next night, a man named Harris disappeared. He was a quiet man, a factory worker, who often took late-night walks to clear his head. His wife, Lucy, said he left the house with a smile, humming a tune no one recognized. When he didn't return, the search party scoured the lot, but found nothing except a single clown shoe, worn and filthy, lying in the weeds. Lucy claimed she saw him once more, dancing under the Ferris wheel's lights, his eyes glazed over, his smile fixed in a way no humans could be. Jenny Torres was next. She was 17 and reckless, the kind of girl who dared the dark just for the thrill. She told her friends she wanted to see the carnival for herself, to ride the carousel and maybe catch a glimpse of the ghosts. That night, she walked into the lot, wearing a red dress that shimmered under the carnival's eerie glow. The music wrapped around her like silk. When morning came, her dress was found torn near the carousel, but Jenny was gone, vanished as if swallowed by the night. People said they could hear the carousel horses whinny and the laughter of children who weren't there. The funhouse mirrors showed you your deepest fears' reflections that twisted and warped until you didn't know what was real. Some who looked too long claimed their reflections reached out and tried to pull them inside, whispering secrets that made their minds crack. A group of teenagers, including me, decided to confront the carnival on the hottest night of the summer. We crept into the lot with flashlights and bravado, but the carnival was nothing like we imagined. The rides weren't just rusted machines, they were alive. The roller coaster track bent and writhed like a serpent, its cars empty but rattling with 1,000 unseen screams. The carousel spun faster than the laws of physics allowed, and the painted horses bared teeth that dripped with something dark. One by one, the carnival claimed us. I remember climbing into a funhouse, its mirrors shifting and changing, showing me not just myself but a future filled with loneliness and despair. When I tried to leave, the hall stretched on forever, the exit retreating like a mirage. I heard the others scream, distant and fading, swallowed by the carnival's hungry heart. I don't know how I escaped. Maybe it was luck, or maybe the carnival let me go because I was still young. When I stumbled out just before dawn, the carnival was gone again, only empty ruins and the smell of burnt popcorn. Years later, the lot is still empty in daylight. But on midsummer nights, when the heat is unbearable and the cicadas sing their song, the lights come back, the music plays, the rides spin, and somewhere the ghosts laugh. If you ever hear the carnival's call, if the scent of popcorn lures you down a dark street on a sticky summer night, don't follow it. Because once you enter Waco's forgotten carnival, you might never leave. The desert stretched out endlessly under the heavy cloak of night. The land around Big Bend a vast expanse of silence and shadow. The stars hung like cold diamonds above, but they were no match for the eerie glow that began to pulse along the horizon. A train of lights, blazing bright and unnatural, cutting through the darkness like a wound across the sky. This was the lost train of Big Bend, a legend whispered in every small town from Alpine to Marathon. A story so old and terrifying that even the bravest truckers kept their distance after sunset. No one knew where the train came from, or why it appeared on moonless nights when the wind was still and the desert held its breath. Some said it was the ghost of a doomed freight line, torn up and forgotten after the mining boom died out decades ago. Others swore it was something darker, a cursed engine carrying souls trapped between worlds, doomed to ride forever on rusted rails that no longer existed. Old Man Whitaker was one of the few who'd actually seen it back when he was just a kid. barely tall enough to see over the hood of his father's truck. He said he was out hunting rabbits near the old Dry Creek crossing when the air grew colder, and a distant whistle pierced the night, soft but full of sorrow. Then came the lights flickering, moving, alive. The train thundered by, impossible and dazzling, like a beast made of fire and smoke. Whitaker swore the faces in the windows were real people, staring out at him with eyes full of fear and warning. "They don't come back the same," Whitaker said, his voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind. "If they come back at all." That warning haunted the town for years. Every summer, travelers and drifters reported strange encounters with ghostly train lights, claiming they'd followed them into the desert and disappeared. When some returned, they were changed silent, haunted, their minds lost to a place no one could reach. Jesse was one of those curious souls. 22, restless, with nothing but a battered guitar case and a head full of dreams, he rolled into Big Bend on a scorching July afternoon. The heat hammered down on his skin, but the night brought relief and the faint, glowing lure of the lost train. Jesse had heard the stories, sure. Everyone in town had. But the kind of stories you hear around a campfire never seem real until the night you face them yourself. And when he spotted the first flicker on the edge of the desert, a shimmering thread of light weaving through the scrub, he felt something inside him pull taut, an irresistible urge to chase. He followed the lights as they danced just beyond. The hills, soft and hypnotic, flickering like a will-o'-the-wisp. The desert seemed to breathe around him, the air thickening, the silence deepening until even his footsteps sounded loud and wrong. The stars blinked out one by one until the sky was nothing but black velvet. Jesse stumbled suddenly onto an old stretch of railroad track, impossibly real beneath his feet, cold iron rails glistening faintly. And then the train came roaring through the desert night. It was massive, bigger than any engine Jesse had ever seen, a monstrous beast made of rust and shadow, flames licking its sides. The whistle screamed a sound that cut through Jesse's bones like ice and fire combined. Windows flashed with faces, some he recognized from town, others unknown but all pale and hollow, like ghosts caught in amber. The train thundered to a halt beside him. Without a second thought, Jesse climbed aboard. Inside was a nightmare wrapped in the guise of a train. The cars were long and dim, lit only by flickering lanterns that cast monstrous shadows on peeling wallpaper and cracked wooden floors. The air smelled of smoke, decay, and forgotten memories. The passengers sat frozen in their seats, their eyes empty, lips sealed. They didn't turn to look at Jesse. They barely seemed alive. Jesse tried to speak, but his voice was swallowed by the endless clatter of wheels on rails. Time twisted and stretched. He lost count of how long he rode. Hours? Days? Years? The landscape outside the windows changed, but only in ways that made no sense. Endless deserts turning to frozen wastelands. Cities rising and falling in moments, faces morphing into monstrous forms before dissolving into mist. Each train car was a tomb of stories, love lost, betrayals, forgotten sins. Jesse could see shadows of pain etched into every corner. He felt the weight of all the souls trapped on the train, bound by curses no one remembered anymore. The whispers began then, low and cruel, voices that promised freedom but delivered torment. The train was a liminal space, a corridor between life and death, where reality frayed and the past bled into the present. Jesse felt his mind unraveling, the edges of his identity dissolving with every mile. When the train finally came to a stop, Jesse found himself back on the cracked earth of Big Bend, dawn bleeding red across the sky. He was alone, but not whole. His skin was pale as bone, his eyes empty and glassy. His heart beat slow and cold, as if the train had stolen part of his soul. No one in town recognized the man who returned that morning. He was silent, distant, haunted by shadows only he could see. He never spoke of the lost train again, but the townsfolk noticed the change. Jesse's laughter, once loud and easy, was gone, replaced by a chilling stillness. And every night, when the wind dies and the stars vanish, the lost train of Big Bend blazes again across the desert sky. Its lights flicker, calling to the restless and the curious, promising a journey like no other. Those who chase the lights may return, or they may vanish forever into the endless night, lost between the rails of time, changed by a train that carries nothing but shadows and forgotten souls. In the sweltering heat of a late summer night, Brenham lay restless beneath a heavy starless sky. The kind of night where the air feels thick enough to suffocate you, where even the cicadas seem too tired to sing. The streets were deserted, except for the occasional flicker of a porch light, casting long shadows that melted into the humid darkness. Doors and windows were shut tight, a silent testament to the unease that had settled over the town like a creeping fog. The first time the scream tore through the silence, it was like nothing anyone had ever heard before. Not a human scream, no, but something ancient and raw, an unearthly wail that cut through the night like a blade slicing through cloth. It was a sound so drenched in sorrow and rage, so filled with loss and despair, that it seemed to reach into the soul and pull out the very heart. They called it the Brenham Banshee. Old Mrs. Callahan, the town's unofficial historian, whispered the tale that no one wanted to hear but everyone feared to forget. The Banshee was not just a ghost. She was the restless spirit of Clara May Thornton, a young woman who had lived in Brenham nearly a century ago. Clara's family had perished in a fire that had consumed their farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The fire was said to be the result of foul play, some whispered, but no culprit was ever found. Clara survived, but only barely, left with scars on her body and a grief too heavy for any living heart to bear. From that night forward, they say Clara's spirit never left the place where her family died. She became something else, something caught between worlds, a harbinger of doom. Her mournful wails would rise from the darkness on the hottest, stillest nights, a chilling lament that foretold tragedy. And those who heard her scream were said to be marked for misfortune, even death. Tommy Jenkins, the town's boy wonder and notorious daredevil, was the first to hear the Banshee's cry in recent memory. It was after a late-night baseball game, and he was cutting through an alley shortcut to get home. The summer air was suffocating, and the silence felt unnatural. Suddenly, a scream erupted, raw, agonizing, full of unspoken pain. Tommy froze, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The sound seemed to seep into his bones, rattling his soul like a stone dropped into still water. When the scream faded, Tommy ran home as fast as his legs could carry him, never looking back. The next day, the town woke to the news that old Mr. Hayes had been found dead on his porch, eyes wide with terror and no visible cause of death. Sheriff shook his head and called it a heart attack, but the townsfolk whispered differently. They said the Banshee's curse had found its first victim. As the weeks passed, the Banshee's screams became more frequent. They came late at night when the air hung heavy and oppressive, dragging an eerie silence that swallowed all other sounds. The dogs howled in unison, and children clung to their mothers with wide, fearful eyes. No one dared to venture outside after hearing the Banshee cry. Men armed themselves with rifles, patrolling the streets and edge of town. But the Banshee was not a foe you could shoot or trap. She was a warning, a shadow of grief incarnate. One night, during a torrential thunderstorm, the screams cut through the rain like a jagged scar. Old Mary Lou, the town's oldest resident, sat in the diner with a crowd huddled around her. She told the story of Clara in a voice as brittle as dry leaves. Clara's family had been everything to her, her mother's. Laughter, her father's gentle hand, her little sister's dreams. The fire had stolen them all, and since then, Clara's spirit cried out for justice, for release, but found none. Jake Morgan, a skeptic and a man known for his bravado, scoffed at the tale. He was a city man, a scientist at heart, and believed there was a rational explanation for every superstition. Determined to disprove the myth, Jake made a late-night trip to the forest near Clara's old homestead. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the only light came from his flashlight, flickering nervously as he moved deeper into the woods. The silence pressed in around him until suddenly the banshee's scream shattered it like a glass bomb. It wasn't just a cry. It was a torment so pure and terrible that Jake dropped to his knees, gasping for breath as if the sound had ripped the air from his lungs. His face twisted in agony, and when morning came, he was found wandering the edge of town, eyes glazed and mouth trembling as he whispered, "She's coming. She's coming for us all." From that night onward, the banshee's cries took on a new intensity, echoing through the streets of Brenham like a death knell. Accidents happened, illnesses struck suddenly, and old wounds reopened as if the town itself was bleeding. People who ignored the scream found their lives unraveling in inexplicable ways. The banshee was no mere ghost story. She was a reckoning. Years have passed, but the legend never fades. On sweltering nights when the wind dies and the world holds its breath, the mournful wail rises again. The Brenham banshee's voice, raw, broken, and terrifying, reminds everyone that some grief cannot be soothed, some curses cannot be broken, and some warnings, if ignored, invite death ever closer. And so the people of Brenham listen with dread, knowing that the scream is never just a scream. It is the herald of sorrow, the cry of the lost, and the promise that tragedy waits patiently at their door. Because in Brenham, to hear the banshee is to invite the darkness to come in and stay a while. Corpus Christi's vanishing island had always been something that the old-timers in town whispered about with a mix of fear and disbelief. It wasn't on any map, nor did it appear in any official records. But when the Gulf of Mexico baked under relentless summer heat waves, when the sun hammered the coastline like a blacksmith's hammer on molten iron, something strange happened. Out in the shimmering blue, where the sea met sky in a blurry haze, an island would rise solid, dark, and real only to vanish as suddenly as it came. When the heat broke out, it started innocuously enough. Old Joe McAllister was the first to swear he'd seen it. Joe was a weather-beaten fisherman who knew every current, every gust of wind, every secret bend of the coastline. One July afternoon, the heat was so oppressive that even the pelicans rested with their wings drooped. Joe was out near Padre Island, checking crab traps, when he spotted it, an island, black against the glittering sea. It wasn't there yesterday. He was sure of it. And it wasn't on any nautical chart he had. He pointed it out to his fellow fishermen at the pier, but they just laughed. "Heat haze, Joe, that's all," they said. But Joe's eyes never lied, and he was sure of what he'd seen. The second sighting came with the next heat wave, just weeks later. A group of 5 college friends from Austin decided to chase the legend on a rented boat. They were young, fearless, and hungry for adventure, the kind of people who laughed at ghost stories and old warnings. They set off early in the morning, the heat already pressing down like a weight. Hours later, they radioed in distress, but the signal was fragmented, filled with strange noises, whispers, laughter that wasn't theirs, and then silence. When the Coast Guard arrived, the boat was floating empty, drifting near where the island should have been. Nothing was missing, no signs of struggle, no bodies, just the boat, eerily intact. The survivors, 3 of the friends, were found clinging to a buoy miles away. their faces pale and eyes wild, muttering about the shadows beneath and voices that pulled at their minds. Lisa, the only girl in the group, was mute afterward. She never spoke again, just stared into the distance as if trapped in a nightmare no one else could see. The town grew uneasy. More disappearances followed. Tommy Reyes, a local dive instructor, known for his bravado, went out alone to disprove the rumors. He was a man who scoffed at ghosts and legends, confident in his skills and gear. But his boat returned empty, rocking gently in the water. A single diving glove floated on the waves, like a dark omen. No sign of Tommy was ever found. The Coast Guard launched searches that lasted for days, combing every inch of sea and shoreline. Nothing turned up. It wasn't just people who noticed the island. Fishermen began reporting strange things in their nets, twisted shapes, fish that seemed to shimmer with unnatural light, and worst of all, voices. Voices that whispered names no one had called out, words in a language forgotten by time. They said the island itself was alive, a malignant presence that reached from beneath the waves and into the hearts of those who dared come near. Some claimed it was the ghost of a sunken town, swallowed whole by a storm centuries ago, cursed to rise again only when the sun scorched the earth. One summer, a group of experienced explorers arrived, equipped with the latest technology: drones, underwater cameras, sonar. They planned to chart the island to find scientific explanations for the phenomenon. When the island emerged under the unrelenting heat, they landed. What they found was unsettling ruins half buried in sand, twisted remnants of buildings that looked centuries old but were somehow untouched by time's usual decay. The air on the island was colder than the surrounding sea breeze, a biting chill that crawled beneath their skin despite the blazing sun. At night, strange lights flickered. Among the ruins, ghostly orbs that danced just out of reach, casting eerie shadows. Some explorers reported hearing footsteps in the darkness, voices calling out in pleading tones. They found carvings on the walls, indecipherable symbols that pulsed with a faint blue glow when touched. One by one, the team began to change, becoming withdrawn, fearful, haunted by dreams of drowning and being trapped beneath endless waves. One of them vanished during the first night. The others searched frantically, but found only his footprints leading to the water's edge, and then nothing. The island seemed to swallow him whole. Terrified, the remaining explorers fled as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the island began to fade with the cooling air, sinking back beneath the waves like a dark, breathing thing retreating to the depths. Corpus Christi's vanishing island remains an enigma. It is a dark blot on the summer horizon, a place where time and reality warp under the pressure of heat and ancient curse. It is not just a place but a trap, an invitation to the curious that turns deadly. It lures those who dare approach with promises of discovery and adventure, but offers only terror and oblivion in return. To this day, when the mercury climbs and the world seems to melt under the sun's unforgiving glare, fishermen, sailors, and wanderers keep their distance. They watch the horizon, knowing that somewhere out there, beneath the shimmering heat waves, a dark island waits to rise, a phantom land that appears only to snatch the unwary, to whisper their names in a language no living soul should hear, and to vanish once more, leaving nothing but fear and silence in its wake. Jefferson was the kind of town where the past never quite settled. It hung in the air like dust, thick and stubborn, settled in the cracks of the sidewalks and the peeling paint of weathered houses. At the edge of town, past the last flickering street lamp, lay the old cemetery, an expanse of tangled weeds and crooked stones, where forgotten children and lost souls lay buried beneath the scorched earth. The kind of place people passed by with quickened steps, their eyes down, pretending it wasn't there, But every summer, when the air was heavy and sticky, when the cicadas droned in endless waves and the sun beat down like a hammer, the cemetery came alive in a way no one wanted to admit. It started with the dolls. They were a bizarre tradition, passed down through whispers and half-forgotten stories. No one knew exactly how it began or why, but each summer families would bring dolls, mostly broken, ragged, sometimes old porcelain figures, placing them carefully on the graves of children. Sometimes these dolls were bought from thrift stores, other times scavenged from dusty attic boxes, their eyes glassy and their smiles faded. Their hair was often tangled and matted with summer dust, their limbs stiff or missing. Locals said it was to comfort the children buried beneath the dirt, to keep them company in the lonely quiet of the graveyard. Others whispered it was a kind of offering, a way to keep some terrible hunger at bay. But all agreed the dolls did not belong, because after the sun sank below the horizon and the world cooled just enough to breathe, something strange happened. The dolls moved, not in broad daylight, not like children playing with toys, but in the stillness of night, in the sweltering dark where the crickets silenced themselves for a moment. The dolls turned their heads. Slowly, painfully, a dry snap, clicking like brittle bone. And their eyes, those glass eyes, would gleam in the moonlight with something that wasn't reflection, something alive. They didn't turn all at once. One would shift here, another there, until the whole graveyard seemed to be watching. The whispered sound was the worst part, barely audible, a susurrus of voices weaving through the thick night air, curling into the ears of anyone foolish enough to linger, whispers that spoke secrets no one wanted to know. The townspeople tried to ignore it. Mostly, they succeeded. The cemetery was an ugly, awkward truth, better left alone. But some couldn't resist. Some had to know that old Mrs. Hargrove was one of those. She had been tending the cemetery for more summers than anyone could count, her hands always dusty and worn, her eyes sharp beneath her heavy brows. One night, she stayed late to water the flowers near the oldest graves, those sunken mounds where the earth had started to swallow names. She swore she heard the dolls. At first, it was just the clicking of heads, slow and deliberate, like dry wood cracking. Then, a whisper came, a voice that wasn't quite a voice but carried words just the same, got double quotes, remember ... us ... She said the whispers told her things, names, dates, promises broken, things buried deeper than bones, things she couldn't forget. Next morning, Mrs. Hargrove's eyes were haunted. She barely spoke except to mutter warnings about listening to things better left unheard. She stopped going out at night altogether. Then there was Tommy. Tommy was a boy whose mother had died the year before, a brittle woman who used to cradle him like a precious thing and sing lullabies that slipped like shadows through the walls of their small house. Tommy never quite recovered from her absence. When summer came, he brought a doll to her grave, a porcelain girl with cracked cheeks and a crooked smile, blue glass eyes staring forever upward. He sat on the cracked stone and waited, watching, as the sky bled color and the stars blinked awake. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of dry grass and dust. And then, as the night deepened and the wind softened, the doll moved. Her head turned slowly toward him, the eyes gleaming sharp and knowing in the moonlight. Then came the whisper, a breath of sound, so soft it could have been a dream. Remember me. Tommy froze, heart thudding against ribs too small for its panic. The whisper grew, voices layering on voices, tales of sorrow, loss, and ancient hunger. The dolls spoke of forgotten children, of promises sealed in blood, of debts owed across the years. They whispered names of the living, too, marking those who would soon join the ranks beneath the soil. By dawn, Tommy was found sitting still, his eyes vacant and wide, the doll crushed in his trembling hands. He never spoke again. Sometimes, late at night, his mother's lullaby could be heard drifting from his window, faint and broken like a half-remembered nightmare. The townsfolk stopped leaving dolls after that, but the dolls kept coming back. Every summer, they appeared scattered on graves where no one had placed them. Broken porcelain faces turned toward the horizon, waiting. And at night, when the heat pressed heavy on the earth, the cemetery became a place of secrets and shadows. People whispered of strange laughter, carried on the wind, of small footsteps in the dark, of figures glimpsed between the trees. They said the dolls were hungry for company, and that their whispered secrets were a curse, binding the living to the dead. No one dared stay until nightfall anymore. No one but the curious and the damned. The cemetery waits still, patient and eternal, holding its collection of broken dolls with eyes that follow you wherever you go. The whispers grow louder with each passing summer, promising that if you listen too long, if you stay too late, you'll hear your own name carried on. The wind. And then you'll know what it means to be remembered. The Texarkana Phantoms returned. The summer of '95 was hot, blistering, unforgiving, and the kind of heat that settled deep into your bones, making every breath feel like you were inhaling fire. Texarkana, a quiet little town on the border of Texas and Arkansas, hadn't seen a heat wave like this in a generation. But it wasn't just the weather that stirred unease beneath the sweat-drenched nights. Whispers had begun again, quiet rumors that the Phantom had returned. Back in '48, the Phantom of Texarkana terrorized the town. Masked and silent, stalking the lovers' lanes, he left behind a trail of terror and unsolved murders. The fear had faded with the passing decades, locked away in dusty police files and hushed stories told to scare kids into obedience. But now, those stories were crawling back into the dark corners of people's minds, as if something ancient was waking up. Jamie Harris was a kid then just 7 years old when his older sister vanished down Lover's Lane one summer night. He remembered the panic in his mother's eyes, the frantic police searches, the never-ending silence where Lisa once was. Over the years, the wounds had scarred but never healed. Jamie swore that no heat wave would ever bring the Phantom back. But heat had a way of breaking things loose, even old fears. That summer night, Jamie, now 24, was driving out with his girlfriend Lisa, no relation to his sister, but her name made his throat tighten in a way he couldn't explain. They were escaping the suffocating town, chasing cool air down the winding roads lined with dense trees and forgotten memories. Lover's Lane was a name given to the stretch of road where young couples once disappeared. Before the town grew afraid to go there at night, the headlights flickered against the thick fog that had rolled in, twisting the shadows into sinister shapes. Jamie tried to shake the feeling that eyes were watching them from the dark, the silence pressing in like a living thing. Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand, her voice soft but uneasy. Maybe we shouldn't be here. But Jamie couldn't turn back, not tonight. He needed to know, needed to face the past. Halfway down the lane, the car engine sputtered and coughed, then died with a final, rattling breath. The world plunged into darkness, thick with the summer night stillness. Jamie tried the ignition again and again, but the engine refused to roar back to life. The smell of burnt wires mingled with the damp earth, and the tension between them grew heavier by the second. Then he saw it. A figure emerged from the thick shadows, stepping smoothly from the roadside. Trees as if he had been waiting all along. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with an unnatural grace, the man wore the same cracked and faded white mask that had haunted Jamie's childhood nightmares. Hollow black eyes stared from behind the mask's empty sockets. The Phantom, Jamie's. Breath caught, the world narrowing to the sound of his pounding heart and the rustle of leaves under heavy feet. Lisa gasped, clutching Jamie's arm. The figure didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a promise of pain, an echo of the terror that had never truly left Texarkana. The phantom's hands, pale and gaunt, reached toward the car. Jamie tried the engine again, desperation twisting his fingers on the keys. The car groaned but stayed silent. Tires spun uselessly on the gravel as the figure moved closer, the mask's cracked grin frozen in a cruel smirk. Lisa tried the door. Handle locked. The windows refused to roll down. They were trapped. The phantom's cold breath brushed the glass, his eyes boring into theirs. Jamie could feel the weight of decades, the vanished girls, the screams swallowed by the night, the unanswered questions, all pressing down like a pedagogy. Suffocating shroud. Time slowed. The phantom raised a hand, and somewhere deep inside Jamie, a scream was born. But it never left his lips. The mask moved, and beneath it, something alive and hungry stirred. Then, as sudden as he appeared, the phantom was gone, vanished into the black woods like a shadow swallowed by night. The engine roared to life. Jamie slammed the gas, the car jerking forward onto the cracked road, headlights piercing the darkness. They didn't stop until the lights of town bled into the horizon, but the nightmare had followed them home, planted in their bones. Days later, the police found the car abandoned on Lover's Lane. The doors were wide open, the air still thick with summer heat, but Jamie and Lisa were nowhere to be found. No sign of struggle. No footprints. Just the silence, heavy, endless. The town's fear returned, thick and suffocating, because the phantom wasn't just a ghost from a forgotten past. He was back. And in the summer heat, with the cicada's song and the shadows stretched long and dark, the phantom of Texarkana reminded everyone that some evils never die. They only wait, patient and hungry, for the next hot night to rise again. The heat in Palo Duro Canyon during July wasn't just oppressive, it was a slow, grinding force that wore down even the hardiest souls. The kind of heat that made the very air shimmer, thick with dust and dry sweat. It pressed down like an invisible weight, suffocating and relentless. On the outer edges of this vast canyon, where the rock walls stretched high and cracked open in 1,000 jagged crevices, there was a secret trail. A path whispered about in old ranger tales and hushed campfire stories, but rarely spoken aloud. By anyone who had seen what lay beyond. It was a Sunday when the group found it. 3 friends, Tom, Lisa, and Marcus, all craving an escape from the city, from their deadlines and screens and buzzing phones. They'd heard Palo Duro was the Grand Canyon of Texas, but they wanted more, something raw, something untouched. Tom was the first to spot the entrance, a narrow slit between 2 towering cliffs, choked with thorny brush and half hidden by a fallen mesquite tree. The sign was ancient, the paint peeling, almost unreadable, warning of unstable terrain ahead. But curiosity clawed at them harder than caution. At first, the trail seemed benign, twisting, narrow, over smooth sandstone worn by wind and rain. But as they moved deeper, the heat suddenly dropped, replaced by an unnatural chill that seeped into their bones. The canyon walls closed in tighter, towering like red giants on either side, their surfaces textured with strange patterns that didn't look quite natural. Shapes flickered in the corners of their vision, eyes, mouths, faces carved into the stone, but too perfect, too detailed to be mere coincidence. Marcus tried to joke about it, saying the canyon had faces watching. U.S., but his laugh was hollow, his eyes twitching nervously toward the shadows. Lisa's skin prickled, and she whispered about hearing murmurs, soft, indecipherable words carried on a wind that shouldn't exist here. Tom, always the boldest, pressed on, calling out to the canyon as if daring it to show its true face. Then came the shift. The trail grew twisted and surreal. The cliffs seemed to breathe, their jagged edges bending and shifting imperceptibly. The sky above vanished behind a swirling red mist, and the light changed, dimming, then brightening in an uneven pulse, like the canyon itself was alive, watching, waiting. Time began to break apart. Their watches stopped, their phones died, and the sun froze in place, hanging motionless over the rim. They tried to turn back, but the path was gone. The walls rearranged themselves, forming a labyrinthine maze of rock faces that towered impossibly high. And those faces, they weren't just rock anymore. They looked down at them with hollow eyes full of ancient hunger and sorrow. Some were screaming silently, mouths open in eternal agony. Others grinned with sharp teeth carved from the canyon's heart. The trio was caught in a nightmare made real. One by one, their minds cracked. Marcus was the first to fall, collapsing to the ground, murmuring about voices calling him home. Lisa clung to Tom, her eyes wide and wild, speaking of shadow figures reaching from the cliffs, trying to pull her inside. Tom's bravado faded. His gaze grew distant as he muttered about folding canyons inside canyons, places where the laws of reality bent and broke. When they finally stumbled out hours or maybe days later, something had changed. Their skin was pale, their eyes glassy. They spoke of impossible landscapes, infinite cliffs curling back on themselves, and the faces, always the faces. The locals who met them later noticed the strange tremor in their voices, the way they flinched at the slightest shadow. Lisa disappeared first. One morning she was gone, leaving only a note scrawled with trembling hands. "They call me back. I have to go." Marcus followed days later, wandering off into the canyon alone, never to return. Tom stayed behind, but even he was haunted seen, speaking to empty air, tracing invisible paths along the canyon walls, whispering to the faces only he could see. The hidden trail remained, unchanged and waiting, a secret wound in Palo Duro Canyon. And the cliffs? They smile wider now, their ancient hunger patient but unending, ready to claim the next lost souls foolish, enough to follow that shifting path into a place where the earth itself has a voice, and it's always hungry. The summer of that year settled over Lake Worth like a thick, suffocating shroud, the kind of heat that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones, making the nights sticky and heavy with the smell of moss and rot from the nearby swamps. It was the kind of heat that made people close their windows tight, run their fans all night, and avoid walking alone after dark. But the heat also seemed to stir something ancient and restless beneath the surface of the town, something that had been lying in wait for years, unnoticed and forgotten, until that summer. The Lake Worth monster wasn't just a local legend anymore. It was becoming a nightmare that walked right up to your front door. The monster had been a whispered tale for decades, the subject of campfire stories and drunken bets at Murphy's Bar, described as a grotesque, ape-like creature with thick, dark fur slicked with swamp water, glowing amber eyes that pierced the blackness, and claws sharp enough to tear through flesh and wood alike. Most people dismissed it as folklore, the ramblings of old swampers with too much whiskey and too little sense. That was until the summer when the mocking stopped and the warnings began. It started small. The kind of small that makes you pause and feel uneasy but dismiss it anyway. At first it was just claw marks, deep, jagged, long, carved into the weathered wooden doors of some of the town's most outspoken skeptics. The kind of marks that looked too deliberate to be animals, but not quite human either. On a humid, sweat-soaked night in early June, the Miller family woke to find their front door shredded, the wood splintered in a cruel pattern like someone had raked a giant hand across it, dragging nails through the grain. Their windows bore scratches too, not just surface level but gouges that scraped through the paint and left raw wood exposed. Neighbors grumbled about raccoons, stray dogs, or some kids playing pranks, but no one could explain the sheer size of the damage. No ordinary raccoon could make scratches that deep or stretch so high. And the Miller family weren't alone. Old Man Jenkins, the town's notorious skeptic, found his porch door similarly mauled the next morning. Jenkins was a man who scoffed at the stories, always quick with a sarcastic remark. But when he saw the fresh claw marks, brutal and angry, he said nothing. Instead, he nailed a board over his door and stayed inside, eyes darting nervously every time the wind shifted. Then the growling began. On the humid nights, when the moon hid behind thick clouds and the cicadas sang their endless song low, guttural, growls would drift through the air like the distant rumble of thunder. It was a sound too deep to be animal, too wild to be human, a primal warning that chilled the bones of anyone who heard it. People began locking their doors and windows tight, even boarding up the houses on the edges of town near the swamp. Yet no lock was strong enough to keep out the creature once it chose a target. Tommy Sanders was the first to suffer the monster's wrath in a way the town could no longer ignore. Tommy was the high school quarterback, a cocky kid who posted videos on social media mocking the monster, laughing as he said, "There's no such thing as monsters. Only cowards afraid of the dark." His videos went viral locally, earning him cheers and eye rolls in equal measure. But one sticky July night, Tommy's bravado met the monster face to face. His friends found his truck abandoned outside his house the next morning. The doors and sides were covered in fresh claw marks, deep and wide, tearing the paint down to the metal, jagged like someone had raked their fingernails with ferocious hate. The truck bed was splattered with something dark and sticky, not quite blood, but something close. Tommy was gone. No sign of a struggle, no note, no goodbye. Just vanished like he'd been swallowed by the swamp itself. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some swore they saw a massive shadow slipping through the tree line near the lake, eyes glowing like fire. Others claimed they heard the creature's guttural growl near their homes, even inside their bedrooms. The monster wasn't just real. It was hunting. Nightmares followed. People who had dismissed the stories began waking in cold sweats, gasping for breath, caught in dreams where the monster stood over them, towering and dripping with swamp water. Its claws stretched impossibly long, reaching down into the depths, pulling victims beneath the black water where no one could hear their screams. Some awoke with scratches and bruises they couldn't explain, as if the nightmare had bled into reality. Mrs. Parker, the local librarian and one of the town's biggest doubters, woke one morning screaming bloody murder. Her nightgown was torn, her hands bleeding from deep scratches she hadn't felt while asleep. On her doorstep, claw marks ran in furious streaks across the wood, so fresh the sap still glistened. Her eyes held a haunted look from that day on, never trusting the dark again. The sheriff tried to reassure the town, organizing search parties and setting traps near the swamp, but the creature was always one step ahead. It moved like a shadow, silent and unseen, striking and vanishing before anyone could lay eyes on it. By late August, the town was different. The once noisy streets grew quiet after dark. Windows were shuttered tight, porch lights left on all night long. People who had mocked the monster found their homes marked with scratches, clawed doors, and broken fences. Some moved away. Others stayed but locked themselves inside, afraid to step out after sunset. The monster's message was clear. Disbelief was dangerous. If you drive past Lake Worth now, past the moss-covered trees and dark waters that stretch like veins into the earth, you'll see the scars left behind, doors torn apart, walls clawed to splinters, vehicles shredded by something with claws like knives. And sometimes, on those hot, humid nights when the air feels thick and heavy, if you listen closely, you can still hear the low growl carried on the wind. A warning, a promise. The Lake Worth monster doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. It's waiting, and it's coming back. Possum Kingdom Lake stretched wide beneath the blistering Texas sun, a vast body of water etched deep into the red clay and limestone hills. To outsiders, it was just another scenic spot, a shimmering blue mirror nestled among pines and rocky cliffs, a place for boating, fishing, and swimming. But to the locals, Possum Kingdom was something else entirely. It was a place that breathed in silence and exhaled darkness. A place that remembered Dot. It was the kind of summer night where the air hung heavy like syrup, warm enough to sweat through your shirt, but cool enough to make the water irresistible. Folks packed up their boats and fishing poles, eager to spend long evenings chasing bass or casting lines under the stars. But swimming after sunset? That was the one thing no one dared do. The lake had a reputation, whispered in hushed tones in the barber shop, the bait store, and the church basement. People disappeared here, men and women, boys and girls, swallowed whole by the lake's deep dark belly. Some were found days later, bodies bloated and pale, faces frozen in terror, eyes wide open but seeing nothing. Others vanished without a trace, leaving behind only ripples and dread. Old-timers told stories about how the lake demanded a sacrifice, a payment to the ancient spirits said to dwell in its depths, restless and hungry. Some called it a curse, others said it was a warning. Either way, the message was clear. Possum Kingdom Lake did not like to be trifled with after dark. One summer, the kind of heat that makes the cicadas louder and the stars sharper, Tommy Grayson came to Possum Kingdom. 17 and full of reckless courage, Tommy had heard the stories and dismissed them as nonsense. The kind of tales small-town people told to scare kids and keep them from having fun. His friends egged him on, daring him to swim out past the docks after sunset to prove there was nothing to fear. That evening, Tommy stood on the edge of the wooden pier, the rough boards warm beneath his bare feet. The sun was a fading ember on the horizon, bleeding orange and crimson into the gathering dark. The water stretched before him, glassy and inviting, but the shadows beneath hinted at secrets. He looked back at his friends, a grin spreading across his face. "Watch this," he said, Dot with a running start. Tommy dove in, breaking the lake's surface with a splash that scattered dragonflies into the cooling air. The water was shockingly cold against his skin, but refreshing. He kicked and floated, feeling the freedom only a swimmer knows, the sensation of weightlessness, the silent lull of the water cradling him. Dot as he moved further from shore. The lake's calm surface began to lose its shimmer, swallowing the last rays of light. The bright turquoise water grew murky and deep, and the gentle lap of waves became a subtle, almost imperceptible pull. Tommy stopped, bobbing up and down, his lungs filling with air. That's when he noticed something beneath him, a darkness. That wasn't just the shadow of the night, but something thick and alive. He blinked, and the water around him seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Dot. Then came the tug, faint at first, a soft tug at his ankle. He turned sharply, heart pounding, but saw nothing but his own ripples. Laughing nervously, he kicked away, but the tug came again, stronger this time, like fingers brushing his skin. Panic tightened in his chest. He started to swim back toward the dock, strokes frantic and desperate, but the water around his legs churned, as if invisible hands were wrapping him in a cold grip. The lake wasn't letting go. His breaths came quick and shallow. His arms thrashed against the unseen force, but it only pulled him deeper, away from the surface. The water grew colder, colder than anything natural, as if he had slipped into the grave itself. His vision blurred with tears and lake water. Tommy tried to scream, but the water muffled his voice, swallowing it into an abyss. His legs were no longer beneath him. Instead, he was sinking, falling into a dark tunnel lined with wet roots and the distant sound of muffled cries. Shapes moved around him, long, slender forms like pale fingers, twisting and turning in the cold embrace of the lake. he felt a whisper against his ear. A voice older than the trees, colder than the stones. The lake calls. The lake takes. On shore, his friends shouted and waved, their voices lost in the thick summer air. They watched in horror as the water's surface smoothed out, swallowing the ripples, the last traces of Tommy's struggle fading into a ghostly calm. The rescue teams came in the morning, dragging nets and sonar scanners beneath the surface. But they found nothing. No body, no clues, just the endless, dark water holding its secrets close. Days later, when the summer tourists packed up and left, the locals spoke again of the lake's hunger. Some whispered that Tommy's soul was trapped beneath the waves, another sacrifice in an age-old ritual. Others said the lake had marked him, and that on certain still nights, if you stood at the water's edge, you could hear the faint sound of someone calling for help, a voice carried on the breeze. Desperate and lost, Possum Kingdom Lake remained, as it always was, beautiful, serene, and deadly. A place where the water was never truly still, where shadows moved just beneath the surface, waiting for the next swimmer to answer the call. And the lake never forgot.